From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to special coverage of the Super Tuesday nominating contests alongside Kailey, Leinz. I'm Joe Mathieu.
At this hour, polls close in Colorado, Minnesota, and the rest of Texas, with 297 Republican delegates at stake among them. Donald Trump so far has had 8 of tonight's 15 states called for him, pushing him closer to the 1,215 total delegates needed to secure the Republican nomination. Nikki Haley does not have many delegates at this point, just 43 in total.
Haley not yet signaling if her campaign will last beyond tonight. She's not expected to speak publicly. This could serve as the de facto start now of a general election rematch between Donald Trump and President Biden, who all but has the Democratic nomination locked up. The issues facing voters as they move forward: the 4 criminal cases involving former President Trump and voter concerns about President Biden's age.
In our latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult polling, 82% of voters in 7 swing states said Biden is too old, and 59% said Trump is dangerous. We'll be hearing from Bloomberg reporters, analysts, and key guests throughout this evening tonight. And of course, Joe, despite the fact that there is concern about Donald Trump being perhaps dangerous as a candidate, he has won not just 8 contests tonight, but in fact, multiple networks are now calling that the state of Texas, including the Associated Press calling this, has gone to Donald Trump as well. So we add this to Arkansas, Massachusetts, Alabama, Maine, Tennessee, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and Virginia. So far, there is no contest that has gone for Nikki Haley.
That's right. So far, a Super Tuesday sweep for Donald Trump, and that could change. We're going to work through 6 time zones, of course, this evening. And, Kailey, it might be until tomorrow morning before we have confirmed calls in California races. Notoriously slow to count votes. But with what we have so far, I think it's safe to say no surprises as this Republican Party leans into Donald Trump.
So with that, let's get to our team coverage this evening. We've got you covered from many parts around the country, but we start right here in Washington with Bloomberg's Mario Parker. So, Mario, no surprises yet, it seems, on this Super Tuesday evening. We're all glued to the state of Vermont, though, where Nikki Haley still looks like she potentially has a chance. The latest figures from the Associated Press, with 48% of the votes counted, Donald Trump 48.6, Nikki Haley 47.8. So we're less than a point margin, but this really might be her only chance to win a state.
This very well may be, Kailey. Just speaking with the sources within Trump world earlier today, they were kind of trying to front run some of this, right? They were mentioning that they hadn't spent a whole lot of money in Vermont. They likened Vermont to Washington, D.C. That was the only primary that Nikki Haley has won so far. They tried to cast it as left-leaning Republicans, if you will, more traditional Republicans as well there. And then they said that there's just not that many delegates there, that it wouldn't change the math toward their march toward that magic number of 12-15.
That's not exactly the Republican legacy that one wants to boast. I won the District of Columbia, dubbed Queen of the Swamp by Donald Trump, now maybe Vermont at best. We've been saying repeatedly this could feel differently after Super Tuesday. If that's what we're looking at tomorrow morning, how does Nikki Haley possibly make the argument that she keeps in this race?
And that's a great observation, Joe. I mean, that's the point. Nikki Haley, for tonight, there's a big tell in the fact that she doesn't have any public remarks. Her campaign says that they're jubilant, they're happy warriors there at the campaign HQ, that she's at her home watching. What I guess the tell would be the fact that in each of the previous primaries, the big nights, Nikki Haley has looked forward to the future. This is the first time that she hasn't. And so while it's unclear what she's going to do tomorrow morning, the writing on the wall seems to suggest that she doesn't have a path forward, at least in the Republican Party, for 2024.
Mario says that with a little emphasis. Unclear if any kind of third party, maybe no labels, could be in Nikki Haley's future. Bloomberg's Mario Parker, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And now we want to go live to Texas, where Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine, is joining us. So Texas has been called for Donald Trump. Julie, perhaps that is in no way surprising, but it's really the down-ballot races in Texas that could be interesting this evening.
Yeah, The former president winning Texas is not a surprise at all, but one thing you do have to pay attention to is the down-ballot race. The one I'm paying particular attention to is the race for Senate. Democrats who want to take on incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Now, a lot of Democrats, they're pinning their hopes on Congressman Colin Allred, who ought to be feeling pretty good right now. He has about 68% of the vote in the Democratic primary, with more than 30% of the vote in. Allred actually outraised Senator Cruz in several fundraising cycles. He's a former NFL player and an attorney. He's been in Congress since 2018. Now in Texas, you need more than 50% of a vote to avoid a runoff. So far, he has that. State Senator Roland Gutierrez is the closest behind with about 13% of the vote right now. Now, you have to remember in Texas, it has been decades since the 1990s that a Democrat has won statewide office in Texas. Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of Senator Cruz in 2018. Democrats really want to take this seat, but it has been an uphill battle here. Now, there's another big race that we're following tonight. That is Houston Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's race. Congresswoman Lee is facing her toughest challenge yet from former council member Amanda Edwards. Jackson Lee has represented Houston since 1995. She did show vulnerability this past year when she ran for mayor and lost to State Senator John Whitmire. But right now she has more than 62% of the vote to Edwards' 36%. The border, as both of you know, is a huge issue nationally. It is a big issue in Texas and has been for elections in years past. We're paying particular attention to that and how Democratic candidates handle the border. If they talk like you hear in New York 3, when Tom Suozzi tried to flip the script on that, saying Democrats are the ones that really supported a border bill. So we will have to see how they handle that. That will be extremely important in Texas elections. Joe and Kailey?
All right. Julie Fine, Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief. Thank you for the primer. It's not lost on us, by the way, that Amanda Edwards was once Sheila Jackson Lee's intern. It's going to be interesting to watch this develop as we now turn to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. He's with us from California, of course, among the last to decide. Ed, it's great to have you with us on Super Tuesday evening. You get the pleasure of covering arguably the most exciting race in the country tonight, the jungle primary for the Senate.
Yeah, it is probably one of the most watched races in the nation, and that is the race to fill the seat of the late Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. And what we have is Democrat Adam Schiff leading, but just in the most recent polls. And Schiff, of course, being the Democrat that led and presided over the first impeachment of Donald Trump 4 years ago. He is put narrowly ahead of Steve Garvey, a Republican who represented the Dodgers as a first baseman in the late 60s to the early 80s, but is a political novice. And they're joined by two House Democrats, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. And as you guys keep talking about, this is a jungle primary. So the top two vote getters, irrespective of the party that they're representing, advance to the general election in November. And this one for Kailey, I note that in California, a Republican's not been elected to the U.S. Senate since 1988. There are other things to watch as well. California's 20th congressional district, which of course follows the vacancy of Kevin McCarthy after he resigned following his ouster as House Speaker. This is kind of Fresno County area. This is a different part of California. We consider California to be such a blue state, but there are parts of it that are purple and certainly parts of it that are red. And, you know, in this context, there's actually two separate votes that need to go on. March the 5th today, Super Tuesday, voters cast ballots for the candidates that are vying for the full term of that congressional seat starting in January. We have another election on March 19th, where voters will have to decide who will fill McCarthy's seat until the end of this year. But as you'd expect, many of the candidates are the same on both of those dates and occasions. I'd also say to you guys, do what Bloomberg does best and follow the money. Look at some of the donors in this state. Biden outraising Trump, but also look at some of the political causes, the money that's coming from technology. In the context of that Senate race, I talked about Democrat Katie Porter. You see a number of prominent names from the world of crypto and other super PACs sponsoring ads against her because of her views, basically the consumer and environmental standpoint against crypto. There's a lot going on, but polls close 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. local time. And as you guys know, slow to count in this state. You could be waiting a while.
Well, glad to have you covering it for us. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow live from San Francisco this evening. Now with us here in Washington, let's turn to our signature political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, joining us on this Super Tuesday, if we're still using super as a description, when it seems very likely that we're going to get the outcome that we all expected. So far, Donald Trump has had 9 of 15 states called for him in the Republican primary. Joe Biden has won every state thus far, which is no surprise. And Rick, this could be the general election starting this evening.
Yeah, I think waking up tomorrow morning, give it the due.
Okay.
Let super be super for another few hours. And I do think that tomorrow begins the general election. And as I said earlier in the program, I think the only distraction from that is the latest in modern political history, a State of the Union in March. And this is really an amazing opportunity for Joe Biden to get ahead of that general election, right? Donald Trump's going to be talking about Super Tuesday tonight, and Joe Biden gets to talk about the country in a way that sets up his run for the presidency starting Thursday night. And I think this is probably one of the most material things that's happened in this election cycle, because tens of millions of people are going to tune in for that, and that's going to dwarf the Trump announcement tonight that he's wrapped up the nomination. So it gives him a unique opportunity, something that's never been done at this time in a modern election cycle.
So then smart to not have Joe Biden in some state around the country and have him at home working on the State of the Union address, because there were some questions about why he wasn't speaking publicly tonight, much like Nikki Haley.
Yeah, you know, I'm in favor of Joe Biden getting out as much as he can. And so while I understand the need to prepare for the State of the Union, I think that he could release, and maybe they will, a video. He could be out with supporters. Sure. So, you know, I do think that would make some sense. But, you know, I think we do need to say how early this is. If we look back to 2016, we had Trump wrapping up the nomination in May. And if you look at 2020, it was June. And so this is early. This is 3 more months. And I think that speaks to the fact that we have never been here in the modern era. This is really incumbent versus incumbent. And so while Donald Trump does have a challenger in Nikki Haley, when we view him as an incumbent president, then this is not that shocking that he is doing as well as he's doing and has done in this race. And, you know, I think the difficult part for people is that people are not very happy to repeat the 2020 all over again. But this is where we are.
Absolutely. And we continue to be there as we have yet another state called for Donald Trump. This makes 10 of 15 in the Republican primary. The Associated Press now calling Colorado for Trump as well. So we add that one to the list, Joe.
Yep, absolutely. 15 states that we're working through, and they're coming pretty quickly. A couple of them in the later time zones on the West Coast where Ed Ludlow is might take some time. In fact, maybe even until tomorrow. But my goodness, talk about a trend here, Kailey. We're setting them up and knocking them down pretty early on. And most of these states have been called within minutes of the polls closing.
Yeah, absolutely, which has been the case with all of the early contests on the Republican side. We have just a minute left here, Rick. For Nikki Haley, as you're watching these results roll in tonight, knowing you have said you would stay in the race after tonight if you remain competitive, are you feeling competitive in this moment?
Yeah, you're probably not feeling competitive, and I'm not sure, you know, whether she really anticipated what competitive means, right? Collecting delegates, competitive, right? She's still in the game. She's raising money. She's making an argument against Donald Trump. But I would say she's had already an impact. I mean, when you look at the exit polls, and I've seen some reporting on it tonight, almost half of her vote that she's getting tonight say that they find Donald Trump unfit to be president and will not support him in the general election. So when you start carving out big chunks of the Republican electorate because the message she brought them, and they say, I'm not going to support the Republican nominee, regardless of whether she does or not, that could have a very salutary effect on Donald Trump in some of these states.
Amazing. Yet the prospect of a brokered convention appears to be going up in smoke on this Super Tuesday. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano will be back with us throughout the night, I'm glad to say, and we'll have breaking news throughout the evening. So you will want to stay with us here on Bloomberg Radio and on Bloomberg TV. Coming up, we'll speak with Larry Sabato, founder and director of the UVA Center for Politics, as part of our special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The key is going to be the 8 or 10% that are pure independents in a general election. They vote not on the economy, but their economy. And do I feel like I was better off before January 20th, 2021, or since? And those kinds of polls, those kinds of numbers, whether the national polls this past weekend or your poll, those are the numbers that are just really troubling for the president.
That was Charlie Cook on Balance of Power earlier today. That was today? It was today. Joining us now on this Super Tuesday, Larry Sabato, the founder and director of the UVA Center for Politics. Larry, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. No surprises so far. They're tumbling now for Donald Trump. Is this the beginning of the general election tomorrow morning, as so many are saying? What are we going to learn in the next 24 hours?
Well, I can see why they say that. I thought the general election started the evening of the New Hampshire primary, but I'm always early. So that's probably the explanation. Look, we've known the nominees since the evening of the New Hampshire primary. I mean, there was a 95% chance or better that it was going to be Biden versus Trump. And of course, everybody whines and complains, oh, not these two, not again. And as that great moral philosopher, Mick Jagger, once said, you can't always get what you want. You're going to have to get used to the fact that we're going to have a rerun. And that's just the way it is. And people have 8 months to adjust to it.
All right, that's a pretty decisive view, Larry. But of course, as we consider the fact that Nikki Haley is still a candidate, in part she said that's because donors are still backing her. But she's also pointed to the numbers that she's drawn in earlier contests. It was north of 40% in New Hampshire. It was almost there in South Carolina. And if you even look at the states that have been called for Trump this evening, granted, all the votes have not been tallied thus far, but in Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, at this point in the count, she is getting more than 20%. 20% of these voters in these Republican primaries are not choosing Donald Trump, who for all intents and purposes is an incumbent in this scenario. Where are those voters likely to go in a general election contest if it's Trump v. Biden?
Well, let me tell you something that I've learned over, I don't even want to tell you how many years. I started in the 60s. It's that what people say in March, they frequently do not follow up on in October and early November. And so there are four things that could happen to Haley's votes. They're not going to Joe Biden. Some of them will, a slice of them will go to Biden, but a slice of them will go to Trump, probably a bigger slice, because we live in a partisan, polarized era, and that is the way most people vote. Then you're going to have 3, maybe 4 independent and third-party candidates, and some of them will decide to saddle there because they don't like either Biden or Trump. And the final choice, which is the worst, and I condemn, as my fellow Wahoo there knows, from the University of Virginia, non-voting. You sit at home, you don't participate, shame on you. But as an American, you're allowed to choose that too. So there are 4 options. And there's one thing I know. In early March, you cannot possibly tell people what percentage of Haley's vote will go into each cupboard.
Reality check from Larry Sabato. With 2 networks now calling, I want to just make a quick visit to Texas 18th District. That's Sheila Jackson Lee wins the Democratic primary for her Texas House seat. Larry, we were told that she was in the fight of her political life here. And I wonder, when you back off, we can talk about Trump and Biden all night long, but these down-ballot races that are frankly a lot more compelling, are they keying off of national politics, or are there nuances that actually matter in these districts?
Well, for primaries, there are always nuances. You know, general election runs on partisan ID for the most part anymore. We used to have a lot more people ticket split and vote for the other party, at least on occasion. Not in primaries. Now, Sheila Jackson Lee, as you said, is a long-term incumbent. She had a great advantage. Her opponent did not. Sheila Jackson Lee graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. So, you know, I have a little bias in that direction. I'm sure you want me to point that out. But she's been there for a long time, and that helps. It helps a lot. She knows lots of people. She just lost a race for mayor of Houston. In fact, she finished rather badly in that. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, she lost that one. Maybe she's learned some things from the loss. Let's give her another term. She's got a lot of seniority, and she can put that seniority to work for us.
All right, Larry, we have 1 minute left with you. In addition to what we're seeing down in Texas, one down ballot race that for you will be the most telling this evening.
The down ballot race would be the race for U.S. Senate, Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate, because you never can tell. And now you mentioned earlier, Ted Cruz finished about 3 points ahead of Beto O'Rourke. That's the best any Democrat has done, or the worst any Republican has done in modern times in Texas. As people always tell me every election year, Texas is turning blue. Texas is turning blue. Well, it hasn't so far, but you know what? One year it's going to. It'll probably be a year where we least suspect it. So I'm watching that Senate race.
All right, Larry Sabato, founder and director of the UVA Center for Politics. Thank you so much for joining us on this Super Tuesday evening. Now, coming up, we'll get a quick check on the markets in Asia with Bloomberg's David Ingles. So stick with us on special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Bloomberg Television and Radio special live coverage of Super Tuesday. And we want to get a quick check on the markets in Asia. Bloomberg's David Ingles is joining us now from Hong Kong. David, how are we looking?
We're looking, well, on aggregate, we're looking flat. That's the regional benchmark. China's providing some lift today, really the opposite of what we had yesterday in terms of price dynamics. So MSCI China, in fact, at about these levels, just coming off highs a little bit. We're about an hour into the cash market session in mainland China. Most of the Asia Pacific taking their cue really from what happened where you guys are, of course, or at least where you guys are in the U.S. Certainly the pullback in the cash markets overnight, although, that being said, despite the weakness coming through, NASDAQ futures, bottom of your screens, S&P futures right here, we're stable across a lot of these contracts in the Asia Pacific. A couple of themes we're tracking here, and just really a cross-section representative of many of those themes in the region. So everything from gold mining stocks, crypto-related stocks. There's a decent earnings theme coming through across the Asia Pacific, for example. So some of your flip the boards, please, if we can. Some of your gold miners across the region on the back of gold hitting record highs. We're pulling back a little bit on some of these names here. Monix Group, that's a crypto-related stock that's traded in Japan, pulling back on the back of also the pullback in Bitcoin prices after we hit that record high. AAC Tech listed here in Hong Kong. That's an Apple supplier. We've been talking about this story. This 24% drop in iPhone sales that's playing out across the supply chain in Apple in the region. And NIO came out with earnings overnight. JD.com, big Chinese tech play, comes out with earnings later today. And I'll leave you with a look at most things macro. So two things are coming up that we're looking ahead to, traders are looking ahead to. One is 3 p.m. local time in the Asia Pacific, Beijing, Hong Kong at least. There's this important press briefing, this joint press briefing. The Chinese Central Bank and all the related departments as it pertains to boosting this economy will be holding a joint briefing at about the market close. And, of course, we're also looking ahead to Jay Powell's testimony in U.S. Congress, of course. So lots to look ahead to. Back to you guys in Washington.
Another busy night. David Ingles, we thank you. Bloomberg's David Ingles will keep us posted on Asian trading throughout our special coverage here on this Super Tuesday. We've got more states to watch here with 10 already called for Donald Trump in a total of 15. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington, D.C. Kailey, we're going to go down ballot coming up next with Tyler Kendall.
Absolutely. There's a lot of races to watch this evening. And, Joe, you said 10. Make it 11. The Associated Press just also called Minnesota for Donald Trump. This is Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is special coverage of Super Tuesday elections here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Thanks for making us part of your evening. Those running for president are not the only ones getting votes tonight. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall takes us through why down ballot races are also consequential on this Super Tuesday. Tyler?
Hey, Joe, you already know there are razor-thin margins in Congress right now. So we're watching the congressional primaries tonight and how they could shift the balance of power in Washington. Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats to flip the House. So experts I spoke with say both parties are pouring in the resources now in hopes of securing victories in November.
What this really boils down to is that, especially in the House, but also in the Senate, many of these races are really decided in the primary. And so the primary is the important race, because come November, it's not really a competitive race between Democrats and Republicans. So right now, the primary is really where the winner could be decided.
Several of the key races are in California, where Democrats are targeting 7 House seats they think they can flip. These are areas where President Biden performed strongly in 2020. Political strategists say money invested today could make the difference in some of these so-called swing districts.
Republican National Committee has not kept up to speed in terms of fundraising, and that's going to have to change. I think that's one reason why they wanted to replace Chairwoman McDaniel. So there's going to be quite a resource gap in this campaign, and on those down-ballot races, I think that's going to make a difference.
On the Senate side, Republicans need to flip 1 or 2 seats in November, depending on who wins the White House. California, again, could be pivotal as we watch for the outcome for the seat left vacant by the late Dianne Feinstein. California holds what's known as a jungle primary. That means all candidates, regardless of party, compete in the Senate in the same race. And money on both sides is pouring in. So far, $68.8 million has been spent on ads. Frontrunner and Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff is the biggest spender in this race, but Republican candidate Steve Garvey is literally giving Democrats a run for their money, too, according to recent polling. Big spending down ballot is a trend we expect to see nationwide. We here at Bloomberg report donors are starting to shift their focus. This includes some backers for Nikki Haley, like the Koch network or Citadel's Ken Griffin. Both say they're going to pivot funding now that congressional races are in play. In fact, records show Griffin has nearly $18 million to Republicans trying to flip competitive Senate seats. So far, he's donated $1 million to the fund that supports House Republicans, but he was one of the group's biggest donors in the 2022 midterms. Joe and Kailey, Griffin poured $27 million into the House races by the end of last cycle.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with a look down the ballot and the money going there. Thank you so much. And now joining us around the table here in Washington, Bloomberg's Peggy Collins and Mike Shepard on both Bloomberg Television and radio this Super Tuesday evening. So, Mike, Peggy, so far this is going largely how we expected it to. At the top line, down the ballot, we're still waiting to get some more information out of states like Texas and, of course, California, which doesn't close until 11 p.m. Eastern time. But at the presidential level, Donald Trump has now won 11 of 15 states up for grabs in the Republican primary this evening. Nikki Haley's last stand, Mike, is that what this is looking like at this point?
She has said that she would take her campaign all the way through Super Tuesday. Guess what? Look at the calendar. It is Super Tuesday.
It is.
So she will have to make some decisions after yet another round of big losses to Donald Trump. How much longer can she keep this up? What is her goal of staying in the race much longer? Is she trying to send a message to the party either for this presidential cycle or for the 2028 cycle?
Well, it's going to be harder to make the case to stay in this race. Peggy, Donald Trump, since we were together in New Hampshire, actually, I'll go back to Iowa, has been declaring victory and trying to start a general election campaign. He's going to do this again, presumably, when he speaks from Mar-a-Lago next hour. Should Nikki Haley be in front of people tonight?
Well, you know what's interesting, Joe, is I was at a briefing with Nikki Haley on Friday here in Washington, and one of the things she was saying is difficult for her in terms of making the decision to drop out is that a lot of her supporters are saying we want a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They don't want this rematch, and even some of the data in our monthly swing state poll is showing that people are not up for this rematch, but when they go to the polls, that essentially is what they're deciding on, and tonight may be the night that we really do formally turn towards a general election.
Well, of course, the other factor that Nikki Haley is considering as she weighs this decision is the fact that she still has resources, at least for now. She's been pulling in millions of dollars so far in 2024. Her campaign said she pulled just $1 million in the first few days of March. And if you have the money, I guess, why not go on? And given what Tyler was just telling us, Mike, the idea that money that was backing Haley is now shifting down ballot. It's not going to Trump. How do financials factor in here, especially when the former president will be trying to run a general election campaign while also fighting a multitude of court cases?
Well, that's a great question, Kailey. And the reason is when you look on the other side of the ballot, at Joe Biden's side, we are seeing the incumbent president, Joe Biden, he and his campaign supporting organizations are raking in a lot of money. And we are expecting the president to continue to be able to draw in those donations. And the Trump's team is struggling doing that right now. We saw over the weekend, we were able to confirm that he met with Elon Musk, who's the second richest man in the world, and with other Republican donors looking for that financial injection that will help him as the general election campaign kicks off.
It really underscores the fact that Joe Biden has a lot more money to play with. When will we start seeing him put that money to work in a more concerted fashion? Has he been waiting for this moment?
I think they've actually been waiting for State of the Union. The signals that we've been getting and reporting that we've been doing is they've been really waiting for the State of the Union as the moment when he will lay out more of his plans for a second term and really start unleashing kind of supporters and people to knock on doors or use the money for ad campaigns across the country, but particularly in the 7 or 8 swing states that they see on the map as being the most consequential for getting the number of votes that they need.
I just feel like we need to check in on the state of Vermont here. I've been trying to do this periodically because it does feel like this might be Nikki Haley's last chance this evening for an actual win. 51.6% of votes counted, according to the Associated Press. Trump is leading by just over a point, 48.4% to Nikki Haley's 47.2%. We've already mentioned we are expecting to hear from Donald Trump this evening, but we are not likely, Peggy, to hear from Nikki Haley herself. At least that's the indication at this time. She's probably weighing what exactly she's going to do next.
Well, one of the interesting things about Vermont is what her campaign has continued to say is that they've been improving as they've gone along from Iowa to New Hampshire. Now to Super Tuesday, they can point to something like Vermont. And they've been saying, look, there are a number of people who want an alternative to Donald Trump. And so he is likely to struggle against Joe Biden when he goes into that general election. So I would expect her campaign, whatever they decide to do tonight, to really hit that button harder.
Ben and Jerry's vote is bringing us down on the wire here. Kailey has Vermont in her focus. We thank Bloomberg's Peggy Collins and Michael Shepard for joining us as part of our special coverage. You want them with you on a night like this. Coming up, we'll speak with Jim Gilmore, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, former governor of Virginia, where the race tonight has been called for Donald Trump. This is special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome back to special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg Television and radio. This is a night in which 11 of 15 states in the Republican primary contest this evening have already been called for Donald Trump. Nikki Haley has yet to win any other primary other than D.C. this past weekend. Meantime, Joe Biden, the incumbent Democratic president, no surprise, has won every Democratic contest thus far. And we are joined now by someone who served in the Biden administration until recently. Ambassador Sarah Bianchi is joining us. She is former deputy U.S. Trade Representative and senior managing director and chief strategist of international political affairs at Evercore ISI. Sarah, thank you so much for coming back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's quite a day. Of course, even if there is a sense of inevitability on this Super Tuesday, that we're going to be looking at a general election matchup between Trump and Biden, a matchup we have seen before back in 2020. From a market's perspective, though, how should we be watching what is going to be an incredibly long general election contest in which rhetoric surely is going to run high and hot? How should we be parsing through this noise?
Well, it certainly was a big night for Donald Trump. As expected, we are now headed into, as you said, a rematch, which even in this divided country, I think most Americans would agree is not something they're excited to see. As you say, we have a long, long way to go and a lot of issues. And we still believe that this election will come down to really only tens of thousands of voters in a handful of states. It's going to be very, very close. Certainly economic news, good economic news is something that Biden is hoping can help him close the gap there. Certainly issues around China will be fast and furious, and the rhetoric will go. And then, of course, we have a number of personal attributes and fitness for leadership that Both will address both President Trump through the many court cases to come, and Biden addressing some of the issues around his age. We think Thursday night, the State of the Union address will be a good opportunity for him to answer some of those questions.
Well, so what's the reaction from the international community at the idea of a rematch here when Joe Biden is telling the world that he is the difference between democracy and something that we can't recognize?
Well, certainly the global markets and countries around the world are watching this closely. This is unusual in that we have seen both of these men govern, and different countries have experienced interacting with both. Both President Trump and President Biden have strong emphasis on building domestic manufacturing in America. Trump a bit more through some of the trade and tariff wars that we saw, and President Biden with a lot of incentives, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of those have rubbed allies the wrong way, although certainly we think Biden has tried to be a bit more accommodating, but certainly countries around the world and global markets are watching this election quite closely.
Well, Sarah, you mentioned the issue of tariffs and China. Of course, Donald Trump has floated the idea of potentially having 60% plus tariffs on everything coming out of China should he be in a second administration scenario. But it's worth noting that the tariffs that were put into place under his administration the first go around are still in place. They were not lifted under the Biden administration. Is this just a scenario in which no one cannot be a hawk on China?
It is certainly behoove anybody to look weak on China right now. As you mentioned, in addition to leaving the tariffs, President Biden also issued warnings last week to Chinese electric vehicle manufacturing that he's going to take steps to prevent them developing and producing in the American market. So I think you're going to hear a lot of hawkish rhetoric on Thursday night from President Biden, and it will be matched. At some point, there is going to probably be some reckoning. I do expect at some point that Biden will point out that a 60% across-the-board tariff on China, and also the 10% universal tariff that President Trump has called for is a bit inflationary, would cause consumers harm. You've already heard that from Nikki Haley and other Republicans. So there are some policies where the candidates may point out that it's going a bit too far.
Well, if the international community, if markets are not going to be hearing from Joe Biden tonight, they certainly will on Thursday. Is that going to be the message that markets carry forward here? We've made the point repeatedly tonight that that'll be his largest audience until the convention. But that's domestically speaking, Sarah. How about internationally?
Oh, I think international leaders around the world will watch the State of the Union. This is very, very important. They are looking to see how this election shapes up. They want to see how hot the rhetoric is going to get, particularly from Biden in the election year. This is not only an opportunity for Biden to speak to the 20 to 30 million Americans that we expect will tune in, but also an opportunity for him to speak to world leaders, to tell him that he is up for the job, that he has a lot of important priorities to carry through with them, and they have a lot at stake in this election as well.
Sarah, thanks for being with us. Ambassador Sarah Bianchi, we thank you for the time this evening on Bloomberg. As part of our special coverage on this Super Tuesday, we turn now to Jim Gilmore, the former chair of the Republican National Committee, former governor of Virginia. It's good to see you, sir. Welcome back to Bloomberg. You were recently calling for unity in the party following a string of early victories for Donald Trump. That has been affirmed repeatedly with more than 10 victories tonight in favor of the former president. Is it time for Nikki Haley to drop out?
Well, yes, it is. It's a little late for her to be dropping out, to tell you the truth. I gathered together about 12 leading conservatives in the country and sent Nikki a letter in the early part of February, right after the South Carolina primary, and said, look, you didn't win your home state. You've lost all the primaries up to this point, all the caucuses. Get out and support the president, and let's unify the party and get about the serious business of defeating President Biden. That has to be our goal now of the entire Republican Party. And by staying in and just attacking Trump the way she has personally, I think that she's probably missed her best opportunity to get out. But still, she still should, and we should unify the party. It's a serious business.
Well, sir, you speak of unifying the Republican Party. Certainly you use that language in that letter addressed to Ms. Haley. And yet when you look at the vote tallies coming in, granted, the votes have not been complete across any of these Super Tuesday states, but she currently has 47% in Vermont. In Virginia, where you served as governor, 34.6%. Yes, the state was called for Trump, but she is pulling in a relatively significant share of voters. Can the Republican Party, that divided, actually be unified in time for a general election in November?
Oh, I think the party can unify in time for a general election. Look, these are landslide numbers. Let's be honest with each other here. This is a really landslide election that we're seeing tonight. And frankly, it's been a landslide up to this point. My home state of Virginia, there are a lot of people, different kinds of attitudes of the people in Virginia. I've served as governor of this state, but Trump is carrying the state tonight 2-1, almost 2-1, and that's dramatic. And then many of the other states are sometimes 3 and 4 to 1. This is a landslide primary victory tonight. So the point is this. This is an opportunity for Nikki Haley to get out and say, look, the time has come for us to unify the people who have been supporting me. That's an honest thing to do. Everybody that runs an election is going to get vote. The time has come to really get out there and to talk about the serious business of changing the country, of really addressing the issue on the border, of really addressing crime in the streets, of really addressing this problem of inflation, which President Biden created. Let's face it, at the beginning of his administration, he created this inflation. He did it deliberately. But the problem is that working men and women in this country are suffering because of this. It's costing so much money now to have the necessities of life. President
There's also
Trump
the aftermath of COVID, Governor. We don't really have a way to confirm he intentionally caused inflation here at Bloomberg. But most recently, you were with us to talk about your passion to fund our ally in Ukraine at war right now with Russia. If Donald Trump is the next president, a lot of folks think that money might not be coming. Is that a worry of yours?
Well, let me say this. You know, and everybody else knows that I am a strong supporter of Ukraine. I believe the Russian aggression is a serious global issue and has to be addressed. But when I was ambassador to OSCE in Vienna on behalf of the United States, that was the time when President Trump actually gave Javelin weapons to the Ukrainians so that they could resist the Russian onslaught. He never really told me or anybody around me to back up from the Russians. We were taking a very strong message there. So the point is that I believe that the track record for President Trump has been strong on foreign policy. And certainly if I'm in a position to advise him, I would advise him of the importance of Ukrainian support.
Sir, are you hoping you would be in a position to advise him in a second administration? Would you seek a job?
Well, I'd seek to have an opportunity to offer him the best counsel that I can. It's up to the president as to what he wants to do. But I, on my part, feel strongly about this issue and about the other issues as well. And, once again, I beg to differ with you on inflation. I've observed all those big spending programs that President Biden was putting in place at the beginning of the administration. And I knew, just like you did, that it was inevitably going to cause inflation, and we got inflation. The interesting question is the impact that it has on working men and women. This is now a populist campaign, which really means that he's concerned about people living paycheck to paycheck, people who are trying to make ends meet, trying to pay tuitions, trying to pay gas, trying to pay groceries. This is a campaign and a candidate who addresses and speaks to those issues.
All right, Jim Gilmore, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, former governor of Virginia, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, as we consider that inflation conversation, knowing that Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, will actually be before the House Financial Services Committee tomorrow, he likely will point to the idea that there also were supply chain constraints in the aftermath of COVID disruptions, like the war in Ukraine that impacted commodity prices as well. All of that has factored in, although fiscal spending certainly also plays a role. In fiscal spending and the outlook for it is very much on the ballot in 2024 as voters head to the polls, not just on Super Tuesday, but of course in November.
Sure. The Biden administration would tell you that this is a global phenomenon. They've done better than a lot of countries in fighting it. But we also hear from Republicans on the daily here who want to hang inflation around the neck of Joe Biden. And we're not going to see the end of this debate, at least until the end of this cycle, Kailey, never mind the fight against inflation itself.
Absolutely. Well, on this note, we want to bring back our political panel now. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, political science professor at Iona University, are still with us live here on Bloomberg Television and Radio from Washington. We were just ending there with the former ambassador to OSCE on the issue of the war in Ukraine, on foreign policy, of course, which Donald Trump maybe is more so an isolationist than Joe Biden, who has made not just that, but also the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, really something he is focusing on at this point in his presidency. Does that help as you head into a really long general election contest? Are voters going to be voting on what's happening abroad, Jeannie, or are they going to be focusing on what's happening at home?
Generally, voters don't go out on foreign policy issues, but this year may be an exception. We're already seeing inklings of that, as we saw with the enormous uncommitted vote against or, a protest vote to Joe Biden in terms of Gaza. So it may be more of a factor this election than it has in the past. And then you couple what's going on in the Middle East with what's going on in Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, China, and, you could see voters going out on that. And, one of the really curious things, and I think it's really important to think about, is we just heard from the former governor talking about the Republican Party unifying. Mm-hmm. And the reality is this issue that you're just talking about a more isolationist wing versus a more hawkish wing of the Republican Party, that's an enormous divide that divides somebody like Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. And until and unless the frontrunner, Donald Trump, reaches out to those voters, it may be hard to unify. So I think that's going to be one of the big questions going forward. How does that happen? And how do you bring these two disparate parts of the party together?
Well, it's fascinating to hear from somebody like Jim Gilmore, who probably has more in common with Mitch McConnell as a Republican than he does Donald Trump. Rick, is he holding his nose? I mean, he's not going to vote for a Democrat in this case, but he's been very passionate about the issue of Ukraine, which could be compromised by a Trump presidency.
Yeah, this is where the divide becomes pretty significant. He is a globalist. He is an internationalist. He's an interventionist. None of those things are Donald Trump, right? And so Republicans like to find cover in saying, I like the policies he had as president in his term of office, but the personality and the chaos was what really distracted us. And, of course, January 6th. Yeah. So in this case, I think you're seeing a rewriting of the script, right? Governor Gilmore's talking points really sound much more like, I'm looking forward to the next Trump administration. It's going to be much different than what you're hearing in the campaign right now. I mean, he wouldn't give any brook to the president's unwillingness to help NATO or Ukraine, and pointed to javelins that the president authorized, in 2017, which, by the way, was 4 or 5 years after the incursion into Ukraine, and only under enormous pressure by Republicans in the Senate did he do that. So I'm sorry, but let's not rewrite history. History is very clear on this. The President, Trump, has not supported Ukraine in a way that has advantaged Ukraine in their fight against Russia.
Although he continues to say, Kailey, if elected again, he'll end the war in the first 24 hours in office. He's never told us exactly how he might accomplish that. Our thanks to Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, our signature panel, with us for the duration this evening. We're going to have a lot more ahead here, more special coverage this Super Tuesday. After the break, polls close in Utah. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome back to Bloomberg's special coverage of Super Tuesday. Alongside Joe Mathieu, I'm Kailey Leinz, live this evening on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And the closing at this hour in Utah. It is nearly 10 p.m. Eastern. Still ahead for the night, California and Alaska.
Yeah, Donald Trump, Kailey, expected to speak this hour, and we'll bring you his remarks when he comes out at Mar-a-Lago, running the table so far tonight, with only Vermont still too close to call, which should say a lot. President Biden winning all of his contests as well this Super Tuesday has been somewhat anticlimactic, at least at the top of the ticket. Here, Kailey, the polls were correct. A commanding lead by Donald Trump being confirmed right now. He's won 11 of 15 states.
Absolutely. And of course, you mentioned Vermont. According to the Associated Press, 59% of the vote is in, and he is leading Nikki Haley by just about a point, 48.2% to 47.3%. So we could be staring down, Joe, a very real possibility that Nikki Haley does not win a single state on this Super Tuesday, and very well could say only Washington, D.C. was the only primary she was able to come away from victorious in 2024.
Which would say a lot about a Republican in 2024. Joining us now is Celinda Lake, the president of Lake Research Partners, for her take on what we've learned this evening. It's great to see you on Super Tuesday. Thanks for putting us on your dance card here. Is the story tonight that the pollsters were right?
I'd love that to be the story.
You never hear that.
We're never, no one ever says that. I'm coming back every night with you guys. No, I think the story is the same story it was like 6 months ago. Joe Biden is going to be the nominee of the Democrats, and Donald Trump is going to be the nominee of the Republicans.
Fair enough.
Okay, fair enough. And Nikki Haley perhaps was a factor only on the margins and may not be a factor after this evening, depending on what decisions she makes.
We hope she stays in.
How likely is that, though, in your mind?
I think it depends on her donors, and I think I would assume that there's an awful lot of pressure for her to get out if she doesn't win anything tonight. But, you know, it depends on her donors. That's when candidates get out, when they run out of money.
Yeah, of course. There's a special group out there, 17%. Who dislike both candidates. To be honest with you, I'm surprised on some days that number is so small, considering the conversation we're having in America right now about age, about divisiveness. What do they do? Stay home?
It's a really great question. And in some of the polls, it's as high as 21%. It's a record high number for this early in the game. By the end of the campaign, there's often a number of voters, but this is a record high number this early. Many of them are contemplating third party. And when you push them, they'd really like a different set of choices. But when you push them right now, they go for Joe Biden, and they have pretty consistently. That's good news for us, because in 2016, they surged for Donald Trump. So it's a very different election this time.
Well, so when we're looking at some of the figures in these Republican primary states in which Nikki Haley, while yes, is losing to Donald Trump, she's polling pretty consistently right now, knowing the full figures aren't in, 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
How many Nikki Haley voters could become Joe Biden voters? Is there an overlap in the Venn diagram of those double haters and the people who are voting for Nikki Haley?
There is an overlap, but it's hard because they hate Joe Biden so much. So I think it's more likely they'd be third party. There's also a lot of voters considering skipping the race, not skipping voting, but skipping the race.
So vote down the ballot, just not the top.
Yeah, and that's interesting because we've only had like 3% of the voters that do that normally. And usually the presidential brings people in, but now the presidential is discouraging people.
How about that? So tell us about the sample. We keep hearing the sample's broken. People lie to pollsters. They don't answer the damn phone anymore. You have to get them online. How do you get an accurate number in this world?
Well, it's really hard. And can you tell all your viewers to please pick up the phone, yourself included? If it says Lake Research Polls, please pick it up.
Call, yeah.
But you call them back time and time again. You offer them multiple ways to respond: online, telephone, text. And you try to, like, we introduce ourselves by saying we're not selling anything, we're not going to ask you for a contribution, because people like to give their opinions, but they just don't want to be hammered to change their utility company.
Is that the first word out of your mouth? I'm not selling you anything. Is that right? When they answer the phone?
And I am not a liar,
Maybe we can learn from this case.
Yeah, this is how the sausage is made, the sausage being political polls in the United States. You mentioned a few times now, though, Celinda, this idea of people maybe going to a third party. If they don't like this general election matchup between Democrats and Republicans, you look for option C, whatever option C is. Utah just closed at the top of this hour at 10 p.m. Eastern. RFK Jr. was on the ballot in Utah. He's struggled to get on other ballots, though. How real of a factor is he in this contest?
Well, the interesting thing is, first of all, he's not on the ballot in very many places, but he is on the ballot in a couple of swing states. It's also, RFK is being misunderstood for his father. You probably saw the poll by Echelon where half of the voters identified his father's picture for him. And what's interesting is if you get to know him, you don't like him. But that name is very formidable on the Democratic side. And all of the third parties pull from the Democrats. It pulls from Joe Biden. And this is the important piece, that third parties can't win, but they can be spoilers, and they can elect Donald Trump.
It sounds to me like Democrats need to run a clarifying campaign on this. I'm being serious. This isn't your father's Kennedy.
Well, They actually have in the free press, and people are quite surprised when they hear that he's a anti-vaxxer, when they hear that he has a mixed record on abortion. They think of him as a Kennedy and environmentalist, so what could be wrong with that?
Sure. Well, you bring up abortion. Of course, in the last election cycle, the midterm cycle in 2022, we saw that issue as really being a turnout driver and, in fact, a disruptor in the elections. Democrats performed significantly better than was expected going in. Is that going to be the same kind of force in 2024? Does it have the same galvanizing effect that much further down the road from the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v.
Well, this is the gift that keeps on giving. So there were some voters who thought, well, they're done, it's over, until the IVF decision. And then the Supreme Court in Alabama. And then the Supreme Court decision that's coming down about jailing providers in Idaho. And then the Supreme Court decision that comes down about medication abortion, mifepristone. And what voters have concluded is they're not done yet. They really mean it. They really want a national ban. And there are a number of states that have initiatives on the ballot. And we haven't lost an initiative yet. We saw the surge in turnout in Ohio on campuses and young people. So, yes, this is a very key strategic element of the 2024 elections.
So often we have Celinda Lake at the table here. Do a little quick math with us. Trump campaign says he's presumptive nominee likely by March 19th, maybe even the 12th. After running the table like this tonight,
yeah,
it's the earlier date in your view?
I think so. And honestly, I think he's the nominee today. I think he was the nominee last month. And Joe Biden is our nominee, in case there was any question about that.
I just want to follow up on your point, though, about young voters. You mentioned how the abortion issue drives them out. But we also saw in Michigan young voters in the college towns, Ann Arbor and East Lansing, more of them voting uncommitted because young people also have a problem with the president's stance on Israel, given what's happening to Palestinian life in Gaza. How concerned are you about the uncommitted movement, or more just what it means?
I'm very concerned about it. I'm very concerned about the division among young voters, because that was part of our secret sauce, not just for this election, but for the long term. But I will say this. They're not going to vote for Donald Trump. They might vote for third party. Right. They could not show up. They could skip the presidential. They could vote for third party. The president and the vice president have taken lots of actions around abortion, around student loans. I hope and pray that we have a ceasefire before Ramadan. And all of those would be important. But young voters are very divided, and it's a very, very serious concern for our party.
We're waiting for results in Utah. Just to reset, if you're joining us late here as part of our special coverage on Bloomberg TV and radio, Donald Trump winning 11 of 15 states. It's been a sweep so far, Kailey. I know that you've got your eyes on Vermont here, and that could swing back into Nikki Haley's favor here. But this is pretty remarkable. Joe Biden now also winning the Democratic presidential primary in Utah. And we should have mentioned, if we didn't already, Minnesota came in. For Joe Biden, Kailey. We'll be looking at the results a little more carefully to get back to what you were talking about, and a series of uncommitted protest campaigns in states like Minnesota, much like we saw in Michigan, might give us a sense of what to look for in the general.
Yeah, or what to look forward to in the State of the Union as Biden tries to message around those issues. Celinda, it's worth noting that Super Tuesday is today. 48 hours from now, Joe and I will still be here in studio on another long day, because the president will be addressing the nation, perhaps the biggest speech he can give in this election cycle, aside from the convention. What is the number one thing he needs to message in that speech?
I think there are three things that he needs to do. One, he needs to set up the contrast, and he's really fighting mad and prepared to do that. Number two, he needs to address the economy and inflation, and I think you're going to hear him be very, very aggressive about price gouging and rising prices and the actions they're going to take and they have taken. And then the third thing is he has to paint the picture of what 4 more years of Joe Biden will be, and what the hell that 4 more years of Donald Trump could be.
All right, Celinda Lake, great to have you with us in our D.C. studios this evening. Really appreciate you joining us. Celinda Lake, Lake Research Partners president and pollster. Coming up, we're going to have more with another famed pollster, Frank Luntz, founder and president of FIL Inc., as we await remarks from the frontrunner, Donald Trump. We are expecting, per his campaign, to hear from him any minute now. So stick with us for special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
have every intention of going to Super Tuesday.
We're headed to the Super Tuesday state.
We'll go into Super Tuesday. We've got Super Tuesday. The people want a choice. We're going to give them that.
Look, I will continue to take the cuts and the bruises and the pain and the insults because I think America's worth it. All I ask is that you stand with me as I do it and take that voice all the way to the Super Tuesday states because it matters.
But what about after Super Tuesday? Nikki Haley there, of course, Republican presidential hopeful, watching the states go to Donald Trump this evening. 11 of 15 so far. Let's reassemble our political panel. Rick Davis is here, partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, also with us in Washington, political science professor at Iona University. So here we are, only a few more to go. Utah, then we get to the West Coast, the states, including California. Here, Rick, we're almost done. Nikki Haley is watching this with her team behind closed doors, not preparing an address tonight. But Donald Trump is. He could be speaking in the next couple of minutes from Mar-a-Lago. What are we going to hear?
Oh, I think he'll declare victory and say on to the battle for the general election. And that should be his attitude. He's going to be the nominee. Even though he might not numerically hit the number tonight, he'll hit it next week. And I think that this is a foregone conclusion. Some of the down-ballot races yet to be determined, and they're going to be exciting and interesting to watch. But the presidential mix is set. The only question is whether or not Nikki Haley says anything tonight or does anything tomorrow. In other words, what is the rationale to continue her fight? I mean, I can see giving her Super Tuesday. You've had your day. You've had your election. It's exactly what you said you were going to do. Now what?
Well, at this point, I would like to chime in with another Vermont update, because according to the Associated Press, 91.5% of the votes counted. Nikki Haley is up more than 3 percentage points. 49.5% to Donald
Vermont
Trump's
Tourism Bureau got to Kailey Leinz.
46.2%. Well, this could be the one victory she comes away with on this Super Tuesday. And as we consider the future of her campaign, frankly, even the future of a potential future campaign in 2028, is winning Vermont enough to hang your hat on when you fought so hard in this election cycle, and all you potentially are going to get is Vermont and D.C., where 2,000 people voted in this primary last weekend?
Well, you know, that's right. And, you know, she may only win 2 at this point. I am still, by the way, looking at Utah. And I keep talking, Kailey's on Vermont, I am on Utah.
It's in play, you say.
Well, the governor didn't endorse Trump, but his wife endorsed Nikki Haley. The lieutenant governor endorsed Nikki Haley. It's got the whole Mitt Romney factor. So, Kailey, I will keep watching Utah.
Perfect.
But, you know, so I think, you know, look, she's not set up to win. She would need at least 5 states to even, you know, get the nomination, considering that that's how the rules work. But the reality is she's getting, you know, what, 20 to 30 to sometimes 40% of these votes. Now, what does that say? It says that there are voters in the GOP who are not excited to go out and vote for Donald Trump, and they're not staying home. They're voting for somebody else. Now, that says that she has the support out there. And in 2028, does she, you know, try to build on something like that? If Donald Trump loses, does she say, I told you so? And that's the argument she keeps making, which is he can't beat Joe Biden in a general election. So she may have a future in the party, but I think it depends on what she does. And quite frankly, if Donald Trump loses, she has more of a party than if he wins. A future, I should say, than if he wins.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg political contributors, are sticking with us. As if you're joining us on Bloomberg Television, you see that Donald Trump is entering the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago on this Super Tuesday evening. Of course, we will bring you some of his remarks when they begin. We want to go now first, though, to Frank Luntz, founder and president of FIL Inc., as we, Frank, await what is probably going to be a resounding victory speech from Donald Trump, as he's won 11 of the 15 states thus far. The general election, Rick Davis said, starts tomorrow morning. Maybe don't say it starts tonight, but it starts tomorrow morning. Is there any other way around it, Frank?
No, there's not. And Rick is exactly correct. And the truth is, it's about to start in roughly 4 or 5 minutes when Donald Trump starts to speak, because he is the nominee. Joe Biden's the nominee of the Democrats. 70% of Americans wish that it wasn't the two of them running again, but that's who it is. That's who they'll have to choose. And the only question we have tonight is whether No Labels will be putting forward a candidate in the next week or two that will have any chance of winning the White House. We do not know that at this time, But America has spoken, and the race for the Republicans and Democrats is over.
It's over, Frank. No Labels told us they'd put up a candidate as Donald Trump gets to the podium here by the end of the week. Quickly, do you think they will?
I believe that they will. It may take 10 days. I spoke to them today, and they suggest they're going to have a very strong candidate. But 2024 is now done, and now it's a matter of whoever is stronger between now and November.
Well, to your point, Frank Luntz, we thank you for jumping on the phone with us this evening. We bring you live now to Mar-a-Lago and the Republican nominee in waiting, it seems. Let's listen live to Donald Trump.
Nobody's been able to do for a long time. We've watched our country take a great beating over the last 3 years, and nobody thought a thing like this would be possible. We wouldn't have Russia attacking Ukraine. We wouldn't have Israel being attacked. Iran, as you know, was broke. When I was running things, they were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah. We had no inflation. Inflation is destroying the middle class. It's destroying everything. Inflation, if you look back over the history, hundreds of years back, inflation is called a country buster. And that's what it's doing to our country. What's happened with inflation has been unbelievable. A lot of people say, a lot of experts have said the stock market's the only thing that's doing well, and that's doing well because our poll numbers are so much higher than Joe Biden's. He's the worst president in the history of our country. There's never been anything like what's happening to our country. Today it was announced that 325,000 people were flown in from parts unknown. Migrants were flown in, airplane, not going through borders, not going through that great Texas barrier that I was with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, the other day, and we were looking at the job they're doing. But in the meantime, they're pouring into California and they're pouring into Arizona because those governors aren't doing anything. They're doing nothing. But today it was just announced before I came out. It was unbelievable. I said, that must be a mistake. They flew 325,000 migrants, flew them in over the borders into our country. So that really tells you where they're coming from. They want open borders, and open borders are going to destroy our country. We need borders and we need free and fair elections, or we don't have a country. This is an incredible group of people. So many celebrities that I'm not going to introduce any because I'm just going to get myself in trouble if I do that, because I'll leave out most of you. But this is a room chock full of incredible, talented people. Like some of the guys.
Donald Trump speaking this evening from Mar-a-Lago after winning so far 11 of the 15 Republican primary states on this Super Tuesday, talking about the issues of the economy, saying there was no inflation under his administration. Not exactly factually accurate. Sure, it was less significant than we saw in the early aughts of the Biden administration. He says that the stock market is doing well, Joe, because of his poll numbers and the fact that he is polling significantly above Joe Biden, who he called the worst president in the history of our country. And he went on to discuss migrants, knowing, as we do, Joe, that the border is a very hot issue in this election cycle, not just at the presidential level, but, of course, down the ballot as well in states like Texas and really all across the country.
Yeah. As Donald Trump speaks off the cuff from Mar-a-Lago, we want to assemble our panel. Once again, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us live in Washington. I guess this is what you told us to expect here, Rick. Never a script, never a plan when you hit the podium on a night like this, being recorded for history. That's just the style of Trump, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is his informal rocket style. I didn't hear him say, and maybe he did, we cut in a little bit late, but I didn't hear him say, and I just got off the phone with Nikki Haley, who has conceded defeat on Super Tuesday. So I'm assuming they haven't had a conversation, which would be traditional, in the politics of yesteryear. But
to make that
I guess that doesn't really happen anymore. But the bottom line is he did mention something I thought was interesting, and it's right, is he's creating history because it's been over 100 years since an incumbent president actually contested an election against a former president. Now, that has great significance. I mean, lost on today because we're in the race and we're talking about two individuals more than two institutionalists. But the reality is that this is the kind of race no American has been alive to see, and it has a bearing on the outcome. We've been talking about Trump's ability to win all these primaries. Well, he's running basically as an incumbent Republican president. And Joe Biden, a sitting Democratic president. And I think that impact is yet to be seen when it comes to the general election, but will definitely have a salient impact.
Well, speaking of Joe Biden, we actually did just get a statement from President Biden on this evening's results. It reads in part that tonight's results leave the American people with a clear choice. Are we going to keep moving forward, or will we allow Donald Trump to drag us backwards into the chaos, division, and darkness that defined his term in office? It goes on to say that he ran 4 years ago because of the existential threat Donald Trump posed to the America we all believe in. Jeannie, that's just part of Biden's statement, but in some senses, it does feel like it is backward-looking, looking back on the Trump administration, perhaps trying to draw the contrast between the prior administration and the current one. But is looking backward enough in this election cycle, or does it have to be about looking forward?
You know, I think we hear there are two things. Number one, Joe Biden and Donald Trump have both wanted to run against each other. They are both wildly unpopular, and they have both long felt that if they were going to win, it would be against each other. And we're hearing that now. So they have gotten what they wanted, not necessarily many people in the United States. The second thing is that we're hearing Joe Biden make a case which is going to be a theme of his campaign, and that is this campaign is to save democracy. Why is he saying that? Well, Donald Trump, who we are just seeing on the screen now, who is he inviting to Mar-a-Lago on Friday? Viktor Orban, the authoritarian leader of Hungary. He's talking about immigration. Let's think about his immigration plan. So this is just what Joe Biden is going to point to. He is talking about the largest deportation in American history, having people in our police and military forces rounding up our friends and neighbors who live amongst us, approximately 16 million people, putting them in camps and deporting them from the country. That is what he's talking about. And so Joe Biden is going to make this case that, in contrast, you may not love me, but this is a very, very dark turn we are taking. Those are just two things. You look at issues like the right to family planning. You look at an issue like the right to send your children to school safely. And he is talking now about removing public funding from schools that require vaccinations. You know what? That's 100% of the schools in the country where parents want to send their kids and want their kids to be safe. So this is the dark future that Joe Biden is going to contrast. And it's going to be, this is not about me, Joe Biden. This is about the dark future that awaits if we do this. I don't know if it's going to work because we lived through Donald Trump and people say it wasn't all that bad. But Joe Biden really believes it was that bad.
We're hearing from Lindsey Graham on cable news tonight, who says it's time for Nikki Haley to endorse Donald Trump. She told Meet the Press that she might choose not to do that, despite taking the RNC pledge. This is part of the difficult conversation that she's having with her advisors right now. What do you think is the right answer?
You know, look, I think ultimately she'll be having to determine whether or not she wants a future in the Republican Party. And the reality is she shouldn't let an endorsement of Donald Trump get in the way of looking at herself in a career in the Republican Party. Does she want to run for national office again? If so, don't let that stand in the way. Sure, I'd love it if Republicans didn't endorse him for various reasons, but he's now the nominee, or will be the nominee of the party. And the reality is it's the party we have today, right? And so they spoke. The convention itself will nominate him, the most important decision-making entity that we have within the party. They will nominate him. And so, sure, you're going to hear a lot of people say rally around Donald Trump. It would be a risk for her if she chose not to endorse him based on her interest potentially in wanting to run for national office again.
Of course, Donald Trump is still speaking at Mar-a-Lago as we all talk here. And he just said, among the other comments he has made, that November 5th is going to go down as the single most important day in the history of our country. Of course, that is Election Day in November. It is 8 months from today, exactly. Jeannie, this is going to be an incredibly long general election campaign. And it could potentially be a very negative one with a lot of really hot rhetoric. How How does it change the game here that voters are going to have to sit through a contest this long? Can Trump and Biden really command their attention, try to influence their minds for 8 months straight? Or where is the real window here?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen anything like this. We're talking 3 months longer than the average general election. And, the idea is, usually there's at least one candidate who people are still sort of getting to know. We know both of these guys really, really well, and our verdict is not incredibly positive. So when you ask about negative, I think this is going to be the most negative campaign we've seen, with two very unpopular people at the top. And so, the American public are going to have to make a choice. And this is what the Biden campaign is saying. You've got a clear-cut choice now, and it is a dark vision versus a more traditional, moderate image in Joe Biden. He may be old, but he is somebody who comes with experience. I mean, they're going to be making this case, but they're going to be spending most of their time talking to and pointing to what the Republicans are promising under Donald Trump. And not for nothing, but we're sitting here today still with a government that doesn't have a budget in place. And they are going to say, do you really want to entrust Republicans, as they've been running the House, to run the House, potentially the Senate, which they could easily take, and the White House? So all of those factors we're going to hear.
Donald Trump says in the speech just now at Mar-a-Lago, our country is known as a joke. Our country is a joke. How do you message a presidential campaign around such a negative premise?
Look, I mean, Donald Trump depends upon people feeling like the country is in a bad place, right? I mean, his supporters, when you look at the survey data, uniformly believe that our country is in a wrong track and it is a broken model. And so he's just feeding the beast that is his voters. I would say junkies like us have been obsessing over this campaign for quite some time already. And frankly, we're getting a little bored with the current antics. That being said, most of America is tuning in tonight for the first time. This is an incredibly important week in a transition into the general election from the primary. And we happen to have the added benefit of a State of the Union, which is another galvanizing moment in American politics for the party in power to give their message of what they're going to campaign on for the general election. So this is a period of time, March to June, prior to the conventions, where the case is made for the general election. And this is when real voters tune in for the first time. This is not something that they're getting terribly bored with. And then you have the conventions and then the sprint to the finish 60 days before the election. And so this is the moment in time when voters are tuning in tonight and saying, what is it that the parties are giving to us? And what we're giving to them is more of the same.
Aren't we lucky to have Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with us on Super Tuesday? Our special coverage continues live from Washington now in a conversation with Joe Trippi, the longtime Democratic strategist, former campaign manager, is with us. Happy Super Tuesday if it's feeling that super, Mr. Trippi. Great to have you with us here on Bloomberg. Can we now confirm that Americans are going to get exactly what they did not want, a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Oh, I think that was always going to be the case. We knew that. I thought Nikki Haley would delay it. But after you get past New Hampshire and South Carolina, it's winner take all. It's not proportional like on the Democratic side, or she'd have far more delegates and literally would still be in it. But given the way the Republican Party parcels out its delegates, this thing's going to be, over by probably next week for sure. But not tonight yet, unless Nikki decides to do something tomorrow.
Yeah, we may not hear from her this evening, even as right now Donald Trump is still speaking at Mar-a-Lago. And one of the things he was just talking about was the credit he says his administration got for the economy and foreign policy. He said the press was fair about those things. And on the economy, Joe, we have seen consistently Joe Biden struggles in that department. He does not get good metrics no matter what the actual economic data suggests. How can he turn that around by November?
Well, the facts are that Trump lost more jobs. I mean, he lost jobs the country lost jobs during Trump's presidency, the only presidency that's ever done that I know of. And yes, Joe Biden's record job creation, but yeah, we had inflation. We came out of the pandemic. Look, this is going to be a part of the case that gets made by the Biden campaign. I think you'll see it in the State of the Union that starts to make the fight that it wasn't so great under Donald Trump. And there will be a contrast. One of the things I agree with is the country's just starting to pay attention to this. They haven't really been paying attention to any of these primaries. I don't think for much of this primary season. And I think in the end, as they turn their focus, I think that contrast is going to wear more on Trump than on Biden over the next 5, 6, 7 months. So we'll see how that turns out. I think tonight, it's still amazing to me that all the coverage is how incredible a night it is for Trump, and it's sort of passing about Biden. The fact is, the uncommitted vote against Biden is actually pretty low in most of these states. I think 7% in Colorado. I think it may be up in the teens in Minnesota. But you look across the board here, and Nikki Haley is, whether it's 25, 30, 40%, maybe defeating him in Vermont, there's a huge vote that she's collecting. And a lot of those voters are saying they don't intend on voting for Trump in the general election. It's that contrast, I think, that she's opening up that is going to open up for Biden, give him a roadmap. I mean, somebody said she's leaving breadcrumbs for Biden to follow in the general election. I agree with that. It's surely he's winning. Obviously, with the way they pick delegates on the Republican side, he's going to get them all. That's the way they set this thing up. But it's camouflaging I think some real weaknesses that Nikki Haley's candidate is exposing, particularly in suburbs.
Well, Joe Trippi, I can only imagine the conversation that you're going to have later with Howard Dean if Nikki Haley wins Vermont, and that is the legacy of this Republican candidate. But I want to ask you about this Senate race in California. You got Jerry Brown elected in California. Is Adam Schiff doing the right thing, elevating Steve Garvey in this jungle primary?
Look, the jungle primaries are really interesting. I've done a lot of them out there. And in California, it would be better for him if Garvey comes in second. He would almost assuredly be the next senator from California. So in that sense, getting into elevating Garvey, getting into a fight with Garvey, positioning Garvey as the opponent isn't a bad strategy at all. It's not clear that will work. I mean, there are Democrats who are right on the heels of Garvey and could slip by him, and it would be a Democrat, Schiff versus another Democrat for the general election. One of the peculiar things about California, then, with the jungle primary, which I think is a great way to conduct campaigns, because it does give voters a different way to make their choices. But if that comes out, then one way or another, Democrat, whether it's Schiff or one of the other Democrats, the seat will be in Democratic hands. Either way, I think Schiff, it's Garvey is his best opponent.
All right, 25 minutes roughly until the polls close. In California, because this evening is not yet over. Joe Trippi, thank you so much for being part of it here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. He, of course, is a Democratic strategist, has managed a multitude of campaigns, including in the state of California. But right here in Washington now, we want to turn to Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Mario Parker, as we have Donald Trump still speaking at Mar-a-Lago after so far winning 11 of the 15 primary contests this evening. And with the exception of Vermont, which Nikki Haley could win once the final vote is in, it looks like he'll actually come away with about 14 of these. As we've been tracking the speech, a lot of talk on immigration, a lot of talk on the economy, on the stock market. Are we seeing Donald Trump, Mario, pivot into policy as he tries to kick off this general election now with President Biden?
That's absolutely what he's doing. I don't think that he's mentioned Nikki Haley just yet. And so you're saying that's very deliberate on the part of the former president, who wants to continue to lean into the fact that this primary is essentially and effectively over with, right? Pivot to some of the strengths that are borne out in the Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll that shows that voters trust him more in the economy. Voters trust him more in immigration. There's a link between immigration and crime in voters' minds. He wants to bear that out.
Okay, so was this a remarkable case of self-discipline for Donald Trump to not mention Nikki Haley tonight? Or has there maybe been a phone call that we don't know about, or an expectation that Nikki Haley makes an announcement tomorrow?
Right. I would be very surprised if either one called the other one, or, you know, I can only imagine how, I can only imagine how that conversation would go. It would probably be pretty unpleasant. But
Hillary Clinton called him.
That's true. She did. But in this case, I think that, yes, Donald Trump has shown throughout this campaign that in those scripted moments, like the victory speech we're seeing now, he can read the teleprompter. He can take his advisors' advice, and he can be a disciplined guy. But then he'll go to a rally like in an hour or tomorrow or something, and he'll say something completely off the wall that will remove the headlines from his disciplined speech on policy to, you know, the last nutty thing he said.
It's also worth keeping in mind here as we talk about the former president talking and even the current president when he talks, there's been a lot of attention paid this cycle to the gaffes that President Biden has made on occasion. Certainly there has been a few, but Donald Trump, too, has mistaken Biden for Obama. He has mistaken Nikki Haley for Nancy Pelosi, suggesting she would have been in charge of security at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And yet it doesn't get the same kind of coverage. It doesn't seem, Wendy, at least per our polling that we've done with Morning Consult in swing states, that any voter really feels like there's the mental acuity question as much with Trump as they feel with Biden.
Right, it is. And I think part of that, he's almost protected by Trump's long record of saying, as I said earlier, nutty things at rallies and things like that. So is it a gaffe, or is it Donald Trump just being Donald Trump? It's a little harder to tell. Biden has a much longer record in office. Biden has a much longer record of giving speeches and doing things where, sure, he used to have the occasional gaffe. I mean, 40 years ago, he was making gaffes, and he has a tendency to make gaffes. But he has a much longer time as a quote unquote normal politician, where Trump comes on and says these nutty things. But also, I think it's a physical thing. Trump comes off as, physically fit, even though he's overweight. He's seems robust. He moves quickly. He talks quickly. And Biden has slowed down a little bit, even though he's still running the country. So, yeah, I think that's where the polling is saying that Biden appears too old, and yet Trump doesn't.
Well, I have to say, the hills are alive with the sound of Nikki Haley. We have this officially now. Kailey, I feel like you should read this headline. Vermont is in the bag for Nikki Haley. Remarkable breaking story. That's going to be the one she wins for the night.
Yes, this is according to the Associated Press. About 83% of the vote count is in. 49.7% Nikki Haley has to Donald Trump's 46%. And yet, Mario, winning one state on Super Tuesday by a single-digit margin when you're losing other states by double digits just makes it very hard to make the case to continue the candidacy. But ultimately, this could come down to the money, right? Whether or not donors still want to throw money after her, good money, potentially after bad.
No, absolutely. In Vermont, and to be clear, it's more of the left-leaning state. And make no mistake about it, as much as Donald Trump hasn't mentioned her in that speech, expect the post-speech statements to point that fact out and try to tie her to Democrats, as he's done before, including on Sunday or Monday with the Washington, D.C. primary as well. In terms of just the donors, the calculus so far has been that it's just a way to put a bet on someone outside of Donald Trump, right? It's a moral victory for both Nikki Haley, but also a moral victory for the donors, right? You're putting down a stance to say that you've essentially been able to put money down against Trump.
Well, Nikki Haley gets 1 out of 15. We thank Bloomberg's Mario Parker and Wendy Benjaminson for the clutch analysis. As part of our special coverage here on Bloomberg coming up, we'll dive into the Senate race in Texas. who will take on Ted Cruz. It's a familiar name. This is Balance of Power. Special coverage on Bloomberg on this Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is special coverage of Super Tuesday elections on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Thanks for joining us as we turn now to breaking news in Texas and Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine. The contest, Julie, to find out who will run against Ted Cruz. And it's a familiar name here in Washington and in Texas. What can you tell us?
It is a familiar name. It is Congressman Colin Allred. This race is finally set, and it is going to be a very expensive one. Colin Allred winning the Democratic primary, according to multiple news outlets. Allred was elected in 2018. He beat well-known and powerful Congressman Pete Sessions, so he knows what a fight is like. A former NFL player and lawyer, he has outraised Cruz in several fundraising cycles. Now, Democrats, Joe and Kailey, they see opportunity here, and that is because former Congressman Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of Senator Ted Cruz back in 2018. That race cost the candidates $100 million combined. Again, you can expect a very hefty price tag on this one. Now, let's also go to Houston tonight. There was a very big primary there. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, she faced her toughest opponent yet, and that was actually her former intern, Amanda Edwards, who did serve on Houston Common Council. Right now, Sheila Jackson Lee is at about 62%. That means if things continue the way they do, she will avoid a runoff. As you know, in Texas, you have to get more than 50% of a vote to avoid a runoff. That was expected to be a very tough race. Right now, Sheila Jackson Lee appears to be doing very well there. Now, you guys, we have talked about this frequently. The immigration and the border. That is a very big issue here in the state of Texas. Now, Republicans feel that they own that issue. Ted Cruz, extremely outspoken on this one. The question now, will Democrats like Congressman Colin Allred, who sits in Congress right now, be able to flip that script and say, hey, we're the ones that are big on immigration. We're the ones that tried to get a bill through, Republicans not bringing that to the floor. So what they can do about this issue will be a very, very big part of any election in the state of Texas, as we're also seeing that nationally right now.
All right, Bloomberg's Julie Fine in Texas. Thank you so much joining us live from that state this evening. Now let's bring back our political panel here in Washington. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Just want to get a quick bite from each of you on this race and whether or not Ted Cruz actually could be vulnerable come November. She said it's going to be a very expensive race. A lot of money could be thrown in it. Is it going to be a lot of money, Rick, spent on something that actually isn't competitive in your mind?
Look, I mean, it depends on what you mean by competitive. 3 points could be a landslide in some people's point of view.
Sure.
But if the Democrats want to pour money into Texas, there's not a single Republican I know who will say that's too bad. The Senate committee, the Republican Senate committee, will support Ted Cruz. They've got a big treasury full of cash that they can support him. So the idea that he's lagging in his fundraising is not going to be a big issue. There'll be plenty of cash, as Julie Fine just said. Texas loves big money campaigns, and this is going to be a huge money campaign. But in order to beat Ted Cruz, you got to get through Donald Trump, who's going to win the state of Texas by at least 5%. And you got to get through the guy who's the tip of the spear on the immigration policy issues that Julie just talked about, and that's Governor Abbott, who is the most popular man in the state of Texas. He has over 55% approval rating, and primarily because of his handling of immigration. And I feel sorry for Colin, who's going to have to figure out a way to sound like Greg Abbott as a Democrat in Congress.
All right, so how does he do it, Jeannie? Because I know you see this a little bit differently. How does Colin Allred do what Beto O'Rourke could not?
Well, let's not forget, Beto O'Rourke, he kept Cruz within 3 points. So it wasn't as if Cruz, ran away with it. Number one. Number two, Democrats believe that Texas and Florida are potential upsets for the Senate races this year. So they're going to pour big money into it, and they want to do it on the back of Colin Allred because he is an incredibly likable, successful, young, very attractive candidate. And on this issue of immigration that Julie was just talking about, let's not forget it was Colin Allred he was one of 14 Democrats who signed a resolution criticizing Joe Biden on the border. He got a lot of pushback from Democrats on that and liberals on that, but he didn't care because he knows, and he's known for a long time, how big this issue is. So he is going to be competitive. He knows this state well, and he is somebody, it's going to be hard. It's hard to upset an incumbent, obviously, but he has a real shot here.
This is going to be fun to watch. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, of course, our signature panel with us here on Super Tuesday night. Coming up, the crypto industry spending big cash in these primaries. We'll break down those numbers coming up next. This is special coverage. Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is special coverage of Super Tuesday on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz here in Washington, D.C., about 10 minutes away from polls closing in California now. That's where we find Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow from his perch in San Francisco. We've got more than 400 delegates at stake. Ed, this is the big prize of the night.
Yeah, it's the big prize of the night. I would say have some patience. California historically counts very slowly. And I'd also quickly point you to the issue of voter turnout. There is a lot of data to suggest turnout will be low in this state. And we have as many voters over the age of 65 as we do under the age of 35. The difference being that a higher proportion of those voters aged over 65 are more likely to cast a vote. And if they are, they're in the demographics which pretty firmly fit the Republican bill. Then goes to the mechanics and politics of the so-called jungle primary. You look at the four candidates for this Senate race to fill the vacant seat left by the late Dianne Feinstein. Right now, Democrat Adam Schiff, who was the former congressman who presided over that first Trump impeachment 4 years ago, has a narrow lead over Steve Garvey, a Republican but sort of inexperienced politico who's better known for his baseball career. Schiff's tactic has been to play up this battle with Garvey. But you look at Katie Porter, the House representative Democrat. Her grievance is like, look, this is not good for the Democratic Party. So you can look at the race in two ways. Schiff, if we look at the data, is more likely to come out on top if he goes to a race against Steve Garvey at the general election in November. Could be closer if he is up against his fellow Democrat, Katie Porter. So the way that we're framing it here in California is, what do we want our politics to be on either side? You know, it is a state that is blue, just under 50% of registered voters, but there are parts that are purple, certainly Orange County, where Porter's from, and then the red parts as well. Keep an eye on turnout, and by tomorrow morning, you guys might have some data.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow out in California. Thank you so much. Now we want to get some final thoughts from our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, as we wrap up our Super Tuesday programming here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Jeannie, first to you. What really did we learn tonight?
I think we learned that Joe Biden has a task ahead of him with this unusual setup of Super Tuesday and then 2 days later, the State of the Union. And his task is big. That may be why he didn't come out tonight and speak publicly. And it is to tell the American public not only what he's done, but what he is going to do. And, you know, he is facing really bad poll numbers over the last weekend. So he's got his work cut out for him. But he has the race that he wanted, and so does Donald Trump. They both wanted to face each other again. Even if we don't want it, that's what they want, and they're going to get it.
Hate to be the wet blanket here, but I'm always glad to play that role. We said in New Hampshire, it was a late night there, Rick. We said this would be the beginning of the general election. Here we are saying it again. Did we just waste all that time?
No, it's not wasted. I mean, it was interesting, and we got to see a little bit of fighting. But there's no question this was Donald Trump's night. Not only was it Donald Trump's night because he collected the delegates he needs, he'll finish it off next week, but the reality is that both of his opponents, Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, gave him the night. It was his night to talk, and nobody else did. So, as Jeannie said, Biden's got a job to do on Thursday. That'll be his night to talk, and that will signify the real cutting of the ribbon and off to the general election. This is the moment that voters are going to be looking in. to see what the candidates were saying. They'll see Donald Trump in the news tomorrow, the victor, and they'll wait to see, I guess, from Joe Biden on Thursday.
Absolutely. And of course, Rick and Jeannie will be with us on Thursday for that coverage of State of the Union. And come Thursday, we don't know whether or not Nikki Haley will still be in this race. We have about 90 seconds left with you two. If you had to put odds by the next time we see you on Thursday, on State of the Union night, as to whether or not Nikki Haley will still be in the running, Jeannie, would you take that bet?
Oh, I have no idea. I think it depends on the donors. I mean, I think in this case, you really do have to do what Bloomberg does best: follow the money, because she doesn't get out because she's not going to win. She gets out because she doesn't have the money to go forward. So I think it's all up to her donors.
What do you think, Rick?
Yeah, I think that quiet is telling us everything. There'll be no more campaign that has any legitimacy, and if she does, it's only a matter of time before she gets out. And then the question is, does she endorse Donald Trump or not?
That's spoken from somebody who's been there and had those hard conversations. We'll, of course, keep you posted on whatever we're hearing from Nikki Haley's campaign. We'll have continued reports throughout the evening here from the West Coast, and a lot to talk about tomorrow here on Bloomberg. Our thanks to Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. That does it for us here for now in Washington.
Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg TV and radio's special coverage of the Super Tuesday nominating contest. To remind you, Nikki Haley did win Vermont was called for her. So far, Donald Trump has won 11 others. There are only a few left. Polls close in California just about 5 minutes from now, and then Alaska later on. I guess at that point it'll be early morning Wednesday for those of us on the East Coast. It's been a marathon. It will continue to be so. But thank you so much for joining us in that effort. This is Bloomberg.